1 year after the theatrical release of The World Is Not Enough, EA dropped two very different games for home consoles. Today, we'll be taking a look at both of them individually before pitting them against each other. And before I have to read about it in the comments, I am aware of the Game Boy Color release, but that one is a very different thing, and wasn't available for nearly a full year after these two. I'll cover that one next, in its own video. So, unless anyone has any objections, how about we kick this thing off? Two consoles, two developers, one publisher, two very different games based off of 1999's The World Is Not Enough. In October of 2000, Eurocom's version released for the N64. EA had partnered up with MGM in 1998, giving them the exclusive rights to the 007 property. Eurocom were working on a 3D engine at the time, which they intended to be used to create games for the PS2, GameCube, and Xbox. When EA witnessed what Eurocom were developing, they offered them a shot at working on the intended Bond project. A month later, the PlayStation would get its own movie tie-in counterpart, though this one was developed by Tomorrow Never Dies veterans Black Ops Entertainment. For more on that game, check out our review on this channel. The World Is Not Enough on the Sony hardware used an updated version of the Tomorrow Never Dies engine, but this time, players would control 007 from a first-person perspective instead of the third. A lot of things were improved, including the enemy AI, draw distances, and textures. At the time, I had no idea that this game was its own thing. I owned both consoles, and I opted for the N64 version simply due to my disappointment with Tomorrow Never Dies on the PlayStation at the time. It also advertised competitive multiplayer, so the choice was a no-brainer. At the time, GoldenEye multiplayer was resurfacing at our college parties, so the N64 version was the way to go. Similarly to the other Bond reviews on this channel, I'm not going to be sitting here spouting out comparisons between these two titles and GoldenEye. We all know that most people consider that one the gold standard, pun intended, and well, there are enough of those reviews out there already. Nightfire's a good game, but this is why GoldenEye is better. Agent Under Fire is neat, but what about GoldenEye? GoldenEye Rogue Agent is... yeah, actually, well, that game kinda sucks. But you get the point. We get it. We understand GoldenEye is good. Not everything has to be compared to it. That being said, it is nice to have another Bond game on the N64. The World Is Not Enough is a smooth, fast, good-looking entry on the hardware, and one that I enjoy playing through frequently. Even more than GoldenEye. Whoops! Eurocom deserve a lot of credit here. Compared to many N64 games, The World Is Not Enough really pops. The colors are vibrant, the animations are smooth, and the controls are responsive. With the expansion pack attached, high color mode can be enabled, which adds more detail to the visuals, but the frame rate does take a minor dip at times. It's definitely not enough to ruin this experience in the slightest though. I always play it with the expansion, and it's fine. I'm kinda gushing over this, but it really is nice to see a game from this era showcase such a wide spectrum of vivid colors. Still, this is an early polygonal game, so for best results, I'd recommend playing on a small to medium-sized CRT, if at all possible. The World Is Not Enough also features dynamic lighting, intricate details, and a very impressive draw distance. Sure, a lot of the backgrounds are static and indestructible, but you can't really have everything. Eurocom made the appropriate choices by focusing on the thing that matters most, the gameplay. I don't know if I've mentioned it before in past reviews, but I really can't truly dig the N64 controller, similarly to the one for the GameCube. It works well for titles developed by Nintendo, but results vary with third parties. Rare is the only exception. I recognize that there are a lot of folks out there who enjoy using these Martian controllers for shooters, but I just can't do it. Theworldisnotenough handles very well with a ton of different control schemes to test out, including ones directly lifted from other N64 games at the time. I still have a tough time manually finding my target, but the auto-aim assist makes things a lot easier. Overall, you won't need to do too much precision aiming outside of a couple of areas, and even they are forgiving enough. Luckily, the stages are designed in such a way that hip firing works for plebs like me, who still can't use an N64 controller. Cycling through weapons and gadgets is seamless. Bond has a ton of firearms as well as a variety of fun toys to play with. Normally I opt for the shotgun because, well, blasting is fun, and my aim is shite, but they all have their place. Gadgets include a nifty little grappling hook deployable from your watch, which allows for more vertical exploration than ever before, as well as a sleeper dart to assist with stealth takedowns. Bond glasses allow for better vision in the darker areas, as well as an X-ray function that can track enemy movements through walls. Many of these additions are only necessary a couple of times throughout the campaign, but they are thoughtful inclusions just the same. The weapons are weighty and look really good with detailed reload animations and sound effects. Whether you're using a pistol or an automatic rifle, everything feels really great. Most of the characters move around quite well in-game. Enemies react appropriately while being shot, and have some decent animations. For an N64 game, there is quite a bit of dialogue, which is impressive on this 32MB cartridge. It's pretty remarkable that Theworldisnotenough looks and plays this well when it contains over 500 lines of speech. Sure, it's compressed, but it still sounds good. John Cleese as R was, unfortunately, the only actor from the film to reprise his role, but the voice actors involved adequately delivered their lines.
Seems well suited for the job.
I'm with MI6, let me through.
Story-wise, the game follows the beats of the movie quite nicely. It's a bit unfortunate that the boat chase opener needed to be eliminated from the final product, but ultimately, there must have been a reason it got cut, and I'd rather an experience flow well than to have bits and pieces involved that don't quite work. For instance, they adapted an on-rails skiing sequence from the movie that feels a bit awkward to control, though this minor complaint probably boils down to my inaccurate aiming yet again. Or it could be the way that the game jostles you around and forces your direction. Eurocom took some liberties by adding a few sequences as well as beefing up some of the ones from the flick with playable stealth or action additions. They all work rather nicely and offer up some variety to the regular run and gun combat. There are 14 missions in all. They aren't particularly long, but they are fun. Narrative beats are largely delivered in relatively static cutscenes in between stages where you can get information by reading through text. It's not ideal, but it is expansive, and I'll take these over lazy, poorly rendered clips taken straight from the movie any day of the week. The stage setups are delivered through in-game cinematics that introduce and cap off each playable sequence. There are some great camera angles and establishing shots for these, which make them work very well. As is the case with most EA-published titles, there are a ton of options to tinker with. For whatever reason, the audio is set to mono, but it's quite easy to change it to stereo. For all of the lousy things this company has done over the years, they have consistently been one of the best when it comes to user-friendly configurations. I mentioned the control options already, but nearly everything can be altered to the user's preferences here for single-player fun or multiplayer. While we're talking about multiplayer, I've got to say Eurocom went above and beyond with the features here. There are tons of different modes, including one that plays out a lot, like Battlefield's Conquest, where it's necessary to hold an objective in order to reserve tickets. Bots have also been added, which makes the multiplayer infinitely more replayable than its competitors. Sure, it's not going to be as fun as couch co-op with a few friends, but for a loser like me who has none, it's the next best thing. Playing exclusively against bots can be a bit annoying though. You won't have much time to think before they just sort of magnetize to you, following you around like that pesky son you thought you had successfully dumped off with their mother. The enemy AI ranges from incompetent to godlike, and this goes for the single player mode as well. They aren't all that intuitive, but they can be unpredictable at times. For a late 2000 release, it's disappointing that the AI isn't better. The enemies aren't horribly programmed, they're just inconsistent in all the wrong ways. There's a lot of variety between missions. They run the gamut from bomb defusal to foot chases and stealth sequences. It rarely devolves into a straight-up shooting gallery, which is much appreciated. Far too many Bond games focus strictly on running and gunning. Here's looking at you, Activision. My point is, there's a lot of stuff to do, and a few ways to conquer most scenarios. If I had to make one very specific complaint, it's that one particular sequence feels like it expects the player to have watched the film. I could be missing something, but it took me multiple attempts to realize what I needed to do here, and it still felt a bit clunky. This wouldn't be so bad if the game didn't force you to replay an entire mission upon death. I don't need a checkpoint every 2 seconds, but it would be nice if I didn't have to do my homework by watching the source material in order to enjoy the game. Also, yeah, I've already mentioned that I don't exactly love the skiing stage. Stop pulling my aim game, please. Aside from that sloppy on-rails sequence, the stages are designed pretty well. Though, if you're expecting a first-person shooter with open environments to explore, you'll likely be a bit disappointed. As good as The World Is Not Enough is on the N64, it's also pretty linear. So straightforward at times that it sort of feels like you're just being guided through the densely packed, detailed stages at a very swift pace. There are a couple of levels that break this pattern, but for the most part, it's a point A to B affair. Each stage is complemented by a fitting composition by Neil Baldwin. I mentioned this in episode 48 of our VGM 101 podcast, but the thing I like the most about this soundtrack is how creative it is. It might not be as memorable as other 007 game scores, but each piece of music in The World Is Not Enough fits the stage it belongs to. Monty Norman's Bond theme isn't repetitively, unnecessarily weaved into every track either, which is good. Instead, Baldwin teases it here and there, and only uses it to subtly drive one piece. As big a fan as I am of the series, I don't need to hear that damn song every 2 seconds, and I feel like the games often use it as a crutch. Neil Baldwin's work is classy, appropriate, and it sets the mood quite nicely. There are multiple difficulty settings to choose from, with tougher enemies and added objectives on the higher ones. Multiplayer maps can also be unlocked by achieving certain goals throughout the story missions, which really adds to the overall experience and encourages you to replay the game. As you can probably tell by this review, I like The World Is Not Enough for the N64 quite a bit. It's a solid first-person shooter for the console that plays as great as it looks. There are a lot of unsung games on the Nintendo machine that don't get the appreciation they deserve, and this is one of them. Oh, but we're not done yet. Far from it. 1 month after the release of Eurocom's first foray into the world of Bond, we had Black Ops Entertainment's second attempt on the Sony hardware. Straight out of the gate, The World Is Not Enough is a notable improvement over Tomorrow Never Dies. It's much more focused, which ultimately makes it feel like a well-rounded, polished experience. This game on the PlayStation largely sidesteps the predictable tropes when it comes to Bond games. Its focus is directly towards gadgetry and sussing out how to progress through the game's 11 short stages. The gunplay is still relatively messy, but the action is largely relegated to the back burner this time around, which is a good thing. The game runs on a modified version of the Medal of Honor engine, which is an added bonus because, well, those early games were all awesome. Similarly to Tomorrow Never Dies, and unlike The World Is Not Enough on the N64, there are no additional objectives on different difficulty levels, which is a bummer. From the get-go, you'll notice that the stages are very compact. Most of the larger action sequences from the film are shown through poorly rendered cutscenes. I'm not going to even get into this again, but these just don't work for me in any game. I find them jarring and ugly. Though I will say that the decision to keep the scope of the levels modest was a good one. As Bond, you'll want to take things slow most of the time, hack that computer, scan those fingerprints, crack that safe, destroy those cameras. It makes you feel like a spy, much more than ever before. I really like these little puzzle boxes. They aren't particularly challenging, but it's a welcome change of focus. Problems still arise when it comes to enemy AI. Sleuthing through a stage using sleeper darts to take them out is fine and all, but they don't stay down quite as long as you would hope. What's worse is that when they awaken, their memories seem to have been completely erased as they simply return to following their set paths. With all of the improvements Black Ops Entertainment has made in the year or so since its predecessor, they still couldn't program a decent stealth section. It's a real shame too, because it is the game's biggest flaw in my opinion. It breaks the immersion. Now, when it comes to the actual combat, it's a bit hit or miss. Like a lot of games from this era, enemies just sort of charge at the player with reckless abandon and start unloading their clips. On the higher difficulty, they laser in on you, which is admittedly more of a challenge, but it's still not particularly fun. This is the Medal of Honor engine, so why don't these baddies take cover more frequently? Why do they have such limited animations? It's not exactly bad, but it does leave a lot to be desired. Spray and pray wins the day again, unfortunately. Shooting down sights is definitely the way to go if enemies are at a distance, but that's only if they don't see you first, which is rare due to their laser vision. Thankfully, they'll only really notice you if you're right in front of them, which is often due to the corridor-like level design. It's not easy to get behind them all of the time. The draw distance is improved, sure, but spotting baddies and routes is still an issue in the few instances where the stages aren't set in confined spaces. All of the familiar guns are available at your disposal based on their real-life counterparts. They are well detailed and feel great to use. The single-shot silenced weapons are really fun to fire. The sound is a bit thin, but there's no denying that everything feels very chunky and satisfying. Like a lot of shooting games from this era, cycling through weapons can be a bit of an arduous chore. The same goes for the gadgets. This is pretty much a given though. Oh, the days before the weapon wheel. I think thin is probably the best way to describe the audio overall. Obviously, the PlayStation is a disc-based hardware, so the sound is technically great, but this often results in a lack of creativity. Bullets and explosions do sound terrific, and with a good audio setup, you'll be able to hear a lot of details in the environments. I'm not sure what it is about the Sony PlayStation, but I just find that things sound too tinny. Enemies can be heard meandering about, footsteps are audible, and the music accents all of this efficiently. The soundtrack for The World Is Not Enough on the PlayStation is very, very good, but it's also repetitive. The tracks themselves are varied and distinct enough, but they are short and loop after only a couple dozen seconds or so. What's here is very inspired, with the slower, moodier pieces being my favorites. We're still not out of those 90s electronic woods just yet, so there's gonna be some boo bum 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 bum, but overall, the music works and it's well placed. It's a lot more reliant on Monty Norman's theme, but the soundtrack weaves it in thoughtfully and minimally. A few pieces here remind me of some of the arrangements from the Mission Impossible TV show. One song in particular gives me some strong Henry Mancini Pink Panther vibes as well. Overall, I like the soundtrack a lot, but it would have been better if some of the songs were just a little longer. The voice work is pretty great. Adam Blackman returns as Bond and does a great job this time as well. John Cleese is, again, the only cast member from the film to lend his voice, and he sounds a bit stilted if I'm being honest, like he doesn't even know where he is. Also, why was he, out of all of them, the only one to return for both games? Either way, the acting is pretty good.
To help you defeat the metal detectors, I'm providing you with a very low-frequency disruptor. When activated, all metals within a 5-foot radius become undetectable. For more urgent situations, I'm giving you a flashbang. Disguised as a small flashlight, this device emits a quiet, high-intensity charge that will temporarily blind anyone facing it.
Bond! James Bond! For do I deserve this great honor?
Alright, so they can't all be winners, though as lazy and stiff as the voice acting can get, nothing is as wooden as this.
Every warhead has a locator card. We can track the signal.
Acting!
Oh, and nothing in this PlayStation version compares to the second last mission in the N64 one, where you have to save her. She's always in the way, though I suppose turning her into a brain-dead pylon is pretty... You know what? Nah, that's just too mean. Anyway, let's get back to the PlayStation, shall we? Visually, the game looks better than average most of the time. As I've stated, the majority of the levels are built up of compact, little areas, which work really well to show off the detailed, varied textures. In motion, things are mostly impressive, but occasionally there will be some warping when it comes to some of the backgrounds and scenery. A large amount of attention was given to these small but dense environments, and everything is rather colorful for the most part. There are a few areas that suffer due to the limitations of the Sony hardware, mainly the larger outdoor set pieces, which come off looking pretty static. Though I'll take these still backgrounds over the empty voids of its predecessor any day. The skiing sequence from the film has been replaced by a slow, brief mountain stage that feels uninspired and perhaps unfinished, and the City of Walkways portion of the game where Bond revisits Valentine looks sparse and flat. But overall, I'd say that The World Is Not Enough is a good-looking game. One of the more interesting setups will have Bond needing to win some money in a casino, which feels like an idea stripped straight from the pages of one of Ian Fleming's novels. It was unexpected and quite imaginative. The reason a lot of these stages work so well is due to the majority of the backgrounds being made up of textures instead of polygons, which I don't have a problem with, since it keeps the frame rate stable and the pace moving briskly along. The character models look pretty blocky, and frankly, just bad. Seriously, what's with Black Ops Entertainment's inability to create hands? In Tomorrow Never Dies, everyone looked like they had boat oars, or flippers for limbs. In The World Is Not Enough, they have creepy little velociraptor claws. It's distracting. You'll also see the same models reused far too frequently with very limited movements. When enemies die, they barely have 3 frames of animation, which is quite underwhelming, even for the time. This PlayStation version has absolutely no multiplayer whatsoever, which doesn't normally bother me, but if I'm being honest, the game is quite short, and with no added objectives to the higher difficulties coupled with the linear nature of the adventure, it doesn't really offer up much incentive to replay. I gave Tomorrow Never Dies a pass on this, but there wasn't really an alternative to that PlayStation entry. It would be silly to state that the lack of multiplayer ruins this game, but it's too lean a package for early 2000s standards. There are a few boss battles throughout, but even these pale in comparison to being able to go head-to-head with a buddy. They are executed fairly well though, with less reliance on strafing and shooting, which is good. All in all, I really enjoyed The World Is Not Enough on the PlayStation despite my tepid, agnostic-sounding review. It's a well-made Bond game with enough interesting ideas to warrant at least one playthrough. The problem is, it doesn't have enough content to keep me wanting to go back for more. Most of the fun lies in solving the game's admittedly simple puzzles. Once they're all figured out, there really isn't much else to experience. I think it's abundantly clear that I prefer the N64 version, but I'd suggest picking both games up if you have the means. They are very different experiences that have their own things going for them. Most of the stages are shared but exhibited in their own way to showcase the strengths of each system. That being said, how about we end this video with a montage showcasing both games? Hey, and click subscribe if you dig this stuff.